first of all, I have a handout that I gave you because I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this movie, so this is just a little background. On the back are some pictures, but I did not give you screen captures because, number one, we'll all just have breakfast. Number two, no one put it there at all because some of them are a little gruesome. So, but actually the pictures that are on the back are of specific things I talk about in my paper. So with that being said, in the realm of critical interpretation, horror films can be disregarded as simple death pornography and taken for granted as literal tales with nothing cognitively meaningful to offer. They do, however, have moral and social significances more impressive than the amount of visceral gore indicative of their cinematic kind. Psychologically analyzing characters' motivations, interactions, and deaths opens up the potential for greater thematic understanding and intellectual interpretation of this terrifying genre. This theoretical significance of horror films becomes even more difficult to argue and support when considering gender issues associated with them. Laura Mulvey, for instance, theorizes the cinematic male as possessor of the gaze, and the female as object of the gaze. Consequently, she argues that the woman finds no pleasure for herself in gazing because she exists only to be looked at. Any role for the female in a movie, particularly a horror movie, is negligible at best, as she can neither manipulate the gaze herself nor control her fate. Linda Williams also addresses this issue when she posits the female as sharing qualities of the monster in a horror film. Both are ostracized or viewed as deformed and different. Essentially, the creature and the woman are not the male, and this is what makes their gaze and presence unpleasant but not unnecessary. As juxtaposition to the male in a horror film, the female in her inferior gaze cannot move the story forward, but instead must continuously showcase a weakness to the male in order for him to represent everything she is lacking or she is not. Tackling both of these theories with an alternative lens is John Carpenter's 1982 cult classic, The Thing, and I'm not over-exaggerating. Set in the Antarctic in 1982, it concerns a group of scientists and divers who come in contact with an alien creature unleashed from the ice. This creature has the ability to consume a host, becoming an undetectable copy of it, then divide its cells and mutate into other victims. After some truly gruesome deaths, the men in this camp, this Arctic scientific camp, must fight to discover who the thing is and who it isn't before it kills all of them. Two elements gave the thing the potential to deliver a new kind of horror experience. First, even though Carpenter's dark remake of the 1951 Howard Hawks and Christian Nyby film, The Thing from Another World, was itself a film adaptation of the novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr., the setting in all of these different interpretations was always a geographically isolated, crystallized world unto itself that created terror through helplessness, such a deprived and brutal environment evokes. Second, and more significantly, the cast of John Carpenter's Thing was entirely male, further solidifying the concept of a foreign world both physically and sexually barren. While Mulvey, Williams, and other feminist arguments may seem pointless based on these all-male characters, the creative use of both the male and female gazes in The Thing simultaneously rely on and contradict these theories, making them indispensable to an empowering feminine interpretation. John Carpenter's monster in The Thing is presented as a sexual female whose killing of all the males, initiating a gaze on her, emphasizes her feminine power of choice while attracting her to the hero's male prowess as her worthy opponent and mate. The charismatic hero in The Thing is J.R. McCready, the team's helicopter pilot. In the original novella, he is introduced and described as a man of bronze from some forgotten myth, a looming bronze statue that held life and walked, age-resisting endurance of the metal spoke in the cragged, heavy outlines of his face. The novella's exposition immediately emphasizes something that McCready has in common with the Thing. He is described as an object holding life, not as having human life. Just as the Thing holds the lives that it consumes, but it is also not human. This is important because, as Alloway says, sociological explanations fail to recognize the historical fact that there has always been a spontaneous human taste for monsters, for the more than or less than human. McCready becomes the female Thing's choice as her perfect adversary and mate because he is less than the other men in the camp because he's not a scientist or an intellectual. Yet he's also more than the other men in his physicality and his leadership over them once the Thing comes into their camp. From the moment she reveals herself, the Thing showcases her femininity. Ripping free from her animal form and growing to a towering grotesquerie that includes pulsing eyeballs and ropey veins covered in slime, multiple mouths screaming and snarling simultaneously, she in essence gives birth to herself. Further female markers at her introduction are these umbilical cord-like tentacles that reach out to capture and connect with her new target for incarnation, but with opposite, as well as the seductive nature of her real form displayed when she's between host bodies. In an interview about the creation of the Thing, Carpenter, the director, explains, "It can look like anything, it comes along and imitates, then shows you every life form it's ever imitated, on however many planets it's ever been on. So it's not one thing we're looking at. It's not one creature that looks like this. It's not like Frankenstein, who never changes. It looks like 100 million different things." Because the Thing is not one discernible creature, but an amalgamation of many unknown life forms, it is hard for McCready and the other men to look away from it or even defend themselves against her in her complex nakedness. Visuals and horror being paramount to the development of unease in the story, some have argued that like surrealist art, which includes elements of emotional shock, psychological chaos, unabashed eroticism, and a disturbing aura surrounding characters, the Thing is a physical work of cosmic art, whose introduction invokes all of the above emotions in the men. More examples of the Thing's femininity move the plot forward. Discovery that the Thing's blood is a key to recognizing that it has consumed parallels menstruation as a key to recognizing the female body's consumption of an unfertilized egg. In both cases, what has been consumed is eventually expelled from the host body as part of the regeneration process, whether it is in the form of a newly assimilated shape for the Thing or a newly begun menstrual cycle for a woman. William Paul calls this process on the body's functions the gross-out phenomenon in film, which really fits here, explaining its function as equal parts tonal and psychological. In the case of the Thing, the despairing and paranoid tone developed in not knowing who has become the Thing is reflected in the repulsion to her blood. Even at the same time, her blood is like a portent of salvation for everyone who's free of her possession, in knowing that. This then becomes a psychologically unifying male fear, as well as a honed-in focus on her femaleness in opposition. The motif of the blood then leads to a symbolic display of the sexual organs. After the Thing has been discovered and the men begin descending into paranoia, their geologist exhibits symptoms of a massive heart attack. As their doctor leans over him to use the defibrillator, the patient's chest bursts open into a giant gaping maw that tears off the physician's arms. He obviously was the Thing. This mouth, shaped like a vagina dentata, and you can kind of see a drawing on the back of the person with the mouth right there, expresses the Thing's female supremacy in her violent display against the phallic symbolism of the doctor's arms. Not merely content to expose her most feminine female signifier, she actively engages her symbolic genitalia to dispose of one who stands between her and her ideal mate, McCready. A third pivotal scene in the film again revolves around these blood and sex motifs. Searching for the thing inside all the men, McCready subjects everyone in the crew to a forced blood test at gunpoint. He cuts into everyone's finger and searching for evidence of a traitorous connection between each individual and the female alien creature. This drive to seek out a symbolic affair is denial-based, which Linda Badley explains as a drive repressing some kind of being, in this case, sex, a hidden secret as eroticized as it is feared, and specifically pointing to the male-female coupling of a man and the thing. Further, Freud supports Badley's sex parallel when he elaborates on this drive being felt in the body as a continuous pressure, an urge, an impulse or tension, driving one towards a particular object that alone can relieve the pressure and temporarily provide satisfaction. McCready's relentless pursuit of the thing is often fruitless, and it thus leads to a shift in the drive, where his desire turns into hatred when it's unfulfilled. So on the surface, on the screen, it appears there's this clear-cut malevolence toward the thing from McCready, but truly it's more a complicated brew of forced abstinence with episodic gratification. But it's during the climax of the film, no pun intended, when only McCready and the thing seemingly remain, that we finally have the intimate interaction between them that exemplifies their complex relationship with one another. While trying to set a trap for her, McCready is confronted by the thing breaking through the Antarctic ice to peer down and study him in her imposing and horrifying naked form. McCready bellows at her, "Fuck you too, bitch," throwing a bundle of lit dynamite at her. Only after this declaration does the thing rear up and pursue McCready. His choice of words here is interesting, considering this is the first scene in which these two characters appear alone together. Yet his use of the word "to" demonstrates that familiarity has already been established between them. What is implied is that the thing is acting in a way to affect McCready directly. The viewer knows this because as evidential support, after his use of the word "to," he throws the lit dynamite at her. This act to kill her is his reaction to her having murdered all the other men in the research crew. The subject of his exclamation is directed outward at her, "Fuck you too, bitch," fuck you too, bitch, versus inward toward himself, "Stay away from me," or "Don't hurt me," for example, signifying that he recognizes her prior acts against the other men as sufficiently depraved to warrant what he deems an equal reaction. His retaliation at her is an admission of equality between man and creature. In specific reference to that equality being between man and female creature, McCready's use of the word "fuck" as an adjective denotes a commanding sexual act directed toward an impending partner, in this case, the female-coded thing. The word "to" is McCready's acknowledgement that she initiated the sexual connection that he is responding to, his anger toward her being a frustration born of his instinctive reaction to her versus the cool, calculated detachment he was able to use throughout the rest of the film when he wasn't alone with her. McCready's physical act of throwing the phallic sticks of dynamite at her leads to a giant explosion, symbolizing the orgasmic completion of the sexual act that these two partners brought out in each other. It is the culmination of their intimate meeting. The denouement brings McCready and the thing's relationship cyclically back to the beginning. McCready leans against smoking remains of the Antarctic facility, knowing he will soon die from hypothermia. Suddenly, another survivor emerges and is questioned as his whereabouts during the climax of the film. This other man, Childs, gives a vague answer, and the two men suspiciously watch each other as they pass a bottle of liquor back and forth, just waiting to see what happens. Whether their death will come from the freezing temperatures or the thing bursting from Child's body hangs as an ominous question. McCready's reaction to this final scene, to the possible survival of the thing, is important because it mirrors the initial cool calmness that he displayed in the beginning of the film. Just sitting quietly staring at Childs, he doesn't attempt to kill him or restrain him, even though the thing may be inside of him. McCready accepts this turn of events versus actively working to change it. reflecting on the circumstances that made the beginning of the movie's detachment and the end of the movie's detachment impossible. One common characteristic is that McCready's gaze is not specifically on the thing at either of those times. At any other time than in the explosion scene, sorry. It is only when he must gaze at her directly or that when he's alone with her that he becomes violent and emotional. When she's hidden from his view or part of the redirection of his view, the thing does not signify the same threatening female to McCready that she does when fully displaying herself during the explosion scene. This cinematic relativity of perspective and reaction to the cinematic female is explained by a psychoanalytical process known as cultural imaginary, which Sasha Bovic explains like this. It is this cultural position that defines her as a subject on the cultural screen. She engages our capacity to envision a different kind of female existence, and it is an occasion for alternative subjectivities to come into being. When regarded within this alternative normative injunction, the space of exile reserved for female characters offers the possibility for renegotiation and redefining female subjectivity. When the female creature in the thing wears the body of another, in this case a male body, then McCready can use the cultural imaginary to redefine her as subjugated inside of a male, and thus she doesn't incite this rabid reaction in him that she does when she looks like a aggressive female when she's not inside a host body. But the introduction of Childs in this final scene should not be misconstrued as a feminine negative. Without Childs, McCready becomes Mulvey's triumphant possessor of the gaze through his absolute defeat of the thing. Regardless of her prior self-possessed and self-directed acts that indeed move along the action on the screen, the thing is ultimately reduced to the object of the gaze if she is indeed blown up. The explosion that was seen initially as a mutual sexual reaction between McCready and the thing would then be off balance and could be viewed as a final dominance on the masculine side. Thus, without the reintroduction of Childs, the thing has become the female whose work it is to showcase the ultimate strength of the male at the expense of her death. In the end, it's interesting to note that there is no criticism concerning John Carpenter's The Thing, which addresses femininity or this idea of a sexualized female monster. Almost all scholarship on this talks about blood. Almost all of it. Is it so beyond belief that a female gaze, albeit one belonging to a female creature, can equal or dominate the male gaze like the thing does with McCready? Noel Carroll suggests that one way to construe the study of the image of women in film is as an attempt to isolate widely disseminated paradigm scenarios that contribute to the shaping of emotional response to women. Flipping this suggestion to consider how society's emotional responses to women affect film interpretations may be an effective tool to consider in the hopes of discovering more assertive female characters unshackled from the female gaze. Another consideration in the search for a new interpretation of the female gaze involves fuller cognitive immersion in the film itself. Cynthia Freeman argues that instead of considering her as the object of the gaze, viewers must ask questions of the female's motivations, actions, and reactions based on her involvement in the plot on the screen, not based on society outside of the theater. If audience members are more aware of this opportunity to open their minds to alternate worlds interpreted by unfettered gender-specific characteristics imposed by directors, media, and society, more positive female interpretations by actors and critics can follow. Linda Williams speaks encouragingly, at one point, for female characterization when she explains how future feminine strong cinema must develop. The destabilization of gender roles takes place both on screen and in the theater, and even the most classic seeming masculine and feminine forms of behavior take on parodic elements of performance that destabilize gender-fixed reactions. Working through John Carpenter's The Thing with a female interpretation of the creature supports the view of the film as developing a tenuous love story between the feminist creature and her equal in the heroic male. But underlying this more impressive female empowerment is the gnawing question of whether or not the impressive female character in this otherwise dominant film, male-dominated film world must be a literal monster in order for her to be considered formidable or important. Is it her outward sexuality and appearance that otherwise makes her an easy target for subjugation in Mulvey's eyes otherwise? Or does the female have a tendency to play into preconceived ideas about subjugation from the male's point of view? Either way, while the female things triumph over her male foes in the otherworldly universe of the Antarctic is clear, her symbolic feminine ability to conquer the way mainstream audiences see remains a frustrating mystery.